Youorns. Greetings, Watford fans. Omar here, and it's time for the youorns observation. We all know this by now. Val Ismael's contract has been terminated by the club. The head coach of Watford FC, the men's first team, is no longer in that position as he is out the door at the Vic. And in his stead comes Tom Cleverley. Now, I think it's a great appointment for Tom Cleverley. And while Val Ismael certainly was doing a number of things wrong at this club over the last few months, particularly for me, the last couple of months, I don't think that the club should have got rid of him. I know that a lot of people will have a very different view of that as Watford supporters, and I must admit, even in perhaps some naivete from yours truly, that I was surprised. I did not think the club was going to jettison him now. I thought that it might have happened at the end of the campaign. But I think immediately reacting to the actual decision to terminate the contract, I do think that there are a couple of things that the ownership and the front office looked at. One of them was very clearly the run of form. I mean, that's obvious to everyone that winning no games at the Vic in the championship since November 28th was completely unacceptable. I think that obviously was very clear. The other thing that I think was very clear, quite clear, was what happened with Ryan Andrews. I think that that proved to be a massive flashpoint in Val leaving. As long as we are talking about this, Ryan Andrews, that whole mess was not handled properly. The manager did a poor job at handling that. The idea that you're going to sit Ryan Andrews and you're not going to start him, and he's not injured, but you're not starting him, and the excuse is tantamount to, well, he needs to be better, he needs to be 100%, he needs to be more like himself. All this kind of nonsense that I'd never believed for a single second about Ryan Andrews from the manager. The idea that you'd sit Ryan Andrews, you wouldn't start him in these games, and you brought in Jeremy Ngakia 4 months removed from even playing a football match into the game against Huddersfield, whichever game it was, while you had a healthy Ryan Andrews sitting there, and you started Ngakia ahead of him, having not played football for 4 months, obviously you really told on yourself there, Val. And the other thing about that, even worse, is that Ngakia got injured in that game against Millwall, I think it was. And as a result, he's now out for another month. A month. He just come back from injury of a 4-month layoff, and now he's out again for another month. That was a big problem here. And how he handled Ryan Andrews, big problem for me. When Ryan Andrews' dad, Wayne Andrews, who used to play at Watford and was well liked at Watford when he was here, for the time he was here, went on social media a few weeks ago. To me, also, that contributed, and not that I'm not blaming Wayne Andrews. Wayne Andrews has every right to stick up for his son. But that whole episode did not look good. It was not a good look for Val. The other problem with Val that I think contributed to his downfall here was not clapping the fans off. Now, some people might look at that in hindsight and think that's trivial. I don't, especially when the club made it very clear that they wanted to try to bring the fans, more of the fans, the disaffected fans of this fan base, back in the fold. And they wanted to bring the club closer to the fans. That was very clearly stated over the last year or so. And the idea that Val, who began his time at Watford, clapping the fans in these games, all of a sudden, because maybe some fans didn't like him, some fans wanted him out, the idea that he would no longer clap the fans in these games and run down the straight down the dugout, straight down the tunnel, that did not sit well with a lot of Watford supporters. I can tell you that now. It was obvious to anyone, even if you didn't watch football and you went on hashtag Watford FC, you saw that time after time after time from Watford supporters who were very disappointed and not happy at all with Val on that. Now, I even was one of those who atted Watford FC and said, look, you got to tell the man to start clapping the fans again. He used to do it. Now he stopped because some fans, what? They didn't like the way he's playing and they want him to go. That's not everyone in the fan base. There's always going to be a loud minority or even a loud majority, but that's not everyone. You're still the manager of the club at the time I said this. You're still the manager of the club, and you're not just the manager of the club when they're going great. You're the manager or the head coach of the club when they're going poorly. And for most of the season, Watford have been poor. Whether they've been on a long run where they lost just 3 games or not, they played poorly in half those games. And you can't be the manager soaking up all the applause when Watford go on this nice long run and all of a sudden pretend not to be the manager when you've had a poor run of results and you've not won a home championship match since November 28th. You've got to still clap the fans. And if you are on this mission to be one of those people who is charged with being the link and the bridge between the club and the fans, you've got to clap the fans. Just doing the post-game interview where the Watford FC interviewer asks you, well, tell us what you think about the fans, a word for the fans today. That ain't good enough when you sit there going, oh, well, the fans are great. Well, you had a Watford FC interviewer prompt you to say those things by asking you to talk about the fans. But your actions in failing to clap the fans off the pitch, in failing to clap the fans who were there, told and spoke volumes about how you really feel. And I'm sure the club looked at that and saw that in recent weeks and months and were not happy. I had Watford supporters all over the place telling me, Omar, he did it again. He stormed down the tunnel. He went straight down the tunnel, didn't clap the fans. I've had people tell me this all the time. It's not good enough. So for those reasons, I can understand, obviously, those reasons, plus obviously the long run of poor form. You know, the one win in their last 12 matches, poor form, right? I can understand why you get rid of him. The bizarre substitutions at times in the last couple of months, especially, not playing Ryan Andrews, at least not starting him in many of these games when he was clearly fit and healthy. And you're bringing in a player ain't played in 4 months and you're putting him to start ahead of Ryan Andrews? No. And now that player you put in ahead of him is out for another month. He worked so hard, did Jeremy Ngake, to get back, and then you throw him in, and then you risk him, and then he's injured. And you had a healthy Ryan Andrews sitting there. Didn't help you with the club, didn't help you with the fan base. The whole Emmanuel Dennis situation has not worked at this club. Dennis 2.0 has been a failure 2.0. And the idea that you'd bring in Emmanuel Dennis, who hadn't played football at the time since November, into that January FA Cup match at the Vic on a Sunday afternoon against Southampton, with Watford leading 1-0, literally about 8-9 minutes to go in the game. The idea that you'd bring him in, whenever it was he was brought in, the 80th minute, the 79th, whatever the hell it was, and you had a few minutes left in that game, and the idea you'd bring Dennis in, who was unfit, hadn't played since November, and was poor, was slow, was way off the pace, and he still is. The idea that you'd bring him into a match like that against, at the time, a Southampton side that hadn't lost since the end of September was absolute blasphemy. And it was Dennis who caused the Southampton equalizer when he turned his back on Jack Armstrong, who scored the goal with Dennis's back turned to the play and allowed that space for Armstrong to score the equalizer in the 87th or 89th minute, whatever it was, when Watford had led from since the beginning of the game, 5 minutes in. The idea that you'd bring Emmanuel Dennis in that situation was absolutely blasphemous. Blasphemous. That is something that a lot of the fans didn't understand. And that's something, as a Watford supporter, that I didn't understand either. I did not understand that substitution to bring him in that particular situation. You've got to play him, but not in an FA Cup game when you're so close to the finish line. That's not where you put Emmanuel Dennis in a game like that. You put him in a game in the Championship where maybe you're away from home. Maybe the game is wrapped up for Watford, or Watford are in a game where it's a 0-0 affair. Whatever it is, that's where you put him. And indeed, he did, I think, get the start against Sheffield Wednesday, which I think was the next game. And they drew 0-0 in that game. Whenever it was that Dennis played, whatever the next game was, he did get a start in, or he eventually got a start in the Championship. But it was a very, very poor substitution, as was the one with Rajvich coming into the game against Millwall. These are all fairly recent ones. Coming into the game against Millwall, and he's there taking throw-ins when he should be in the box at 6'4" to try to get the equalizer. in a game Watford were trailing in 1-0. It's things like that that had me shaking my head. And it's things like that that have a lot of the Watford fan base, quite frankly, I think some of them celebrating tonight in the early hours of the morning, Sunday morning in the UK, that Valerien Ismael is out the door at the Vic. However, before I get to Tom Cleverley, I would caution those celebrations because whether you think he had to go or not, I do want to ask you one question. With regard to this men's first team at Watford, what do you think the club's objectives are? Can you articulate what it is the club's objectives are for this men's first team? Because I dare say that you probably cannot tell me what the club's objectives are for the Watford men's first team. I don't think you can tell me. I'm pretty confident that you can't. I don't know either. That makes a lot of us as Watford fans. And that's my point. I would caution the celebrations because, again, the long-term objective is non-existent as far as I can see, where this men's first team is concerned. I don't know what it is. I'm not so sure that the owner knows. I'm not so sure that the front office knows. It's a real problem. This owner and this front office does the same thing every season, expecting different results. And that's what insanity is. And I really don't think that the idea that Val Ismael's gone is going to change that much at Watford as far as the men's first team is concerned. I really don't think that that is going to happen. It's not going to change very much at all. The same problems exist. There was no appreciable difference aside from that really nice long run that they went on, obviously. There's no appreciable difference between what you're seeing now and what you saw last season or 2 seasons ago in terms of the home form. No real difference. Watford lost many games last season at home. They lost many games the season before at home in the Premier League. They've only won 5 home games this season in the Championship. They've only won 1 home game at all this calendar year. That happened to be against Chesterfield in the FA Cup third round. The League One side, who were leading after 75 minutes and outplayed us for all of those 75 minutes until Watford woke up. And if it wasn't for TDB in the 96th minute from the penalty spot, we would have been knocked out of that contest at the Vic. That is the only win we've had at the Vic since November. That was not in the Championship. What was Val Ismael brought in here for? He was brought in to help close the gap between the fans and the club. That's what Rob Edwards was brought in here for. He got rid of him too. I think people were much more upset about that than they are about this with Val. But if Val was brought in here to build this club and to build up the first team of men's first team, I'm specifically talking about, and to start the upward trajectory, 9 months, barely 9 months, is not going to be enough time to do that, especially when your recruiting is poor, especially when some of the decision making financially has been very poor. By sacking Val Ismael, and many people felt that he should have been sacked, you are only papering over certain amounts of cracks. The underlying cracks in the soil, in the surface, run much deeper and are cracks that belong to people in the front office and the ownership. That's the way I see it at this hour. That's the way I see it. If you really want to build something, and if you really want people to come to that thing that you're building, hence the movie Field of Dreams from years ago, then you have to stick with a builder or builders. If you want a sturdy foundation, having a million different builders every season, three here, three there, three another season, is not going to make that foundation any sturdier. Has it done in the last 5 years? Made the foundation at Watford, where the men's first team are concerned, any sturdier? Sacking three managers last season, sacking three managers the season before. Do you think that that has helped stabilize Watford FC as a first team of men's players? I don't. I don't see it. Do you? So while people in the short term are over the moon, some of us as Watford supporters, over the moon about Val being sacked, celebrating it, I would really caution people, and people have the right to celebrate it if they want to, as Watford supporters. I would really caution that though, because I think the club is making mugs of us all. If we're celebrating this tonight, we're really kind of celebrating being punked because this tune has been played before and the notes are sour and they continue to be sour. They were sour last season when we had three managers in here. They were sour the season before when we had three managers in here. And we have not become a better football club because of these sackings, because of these new managers. The new manager bounce is a fable. The new manager bounce is a term that the sports media has used that is overused and it's overrated. And it doesn't happen for every club. In fact, I would dare say it doesn't happen for most football clubs. There are obvious exceptions. It happened for Millwall, didn't it, with Neil Harris, didn't it? But for the most part, the new manager bounce is a fiction. It's a complete fiction. Certainly for Watford, it has been for the most part over the last few years. But I just think that while some of us celebrate this at this late hour and in the days after that, celebrate the end of the reign of Val Ismael, we have to really be careful about what we're celebrating here. Because, like it or not, Val's going to land another job somewhere else. And by the way, this is his fourth sacking in just over 2+ years. So maybe there's something to that, right? And that's why I had skepticism about him coming in the first place. Because of the fact at the time, he'd been sacked 3 times in just under 2 years. Now it's a fourth sacking in just over 2.5+ years, just under 3 years. That should tell you something. I get it. In the short term, something had to be done. And yes, people were worried about a relegation scrap because of the opponents, the Leeds of the world, the Ipswiches, the Southamptons of the world, the West Broms of the world. I do understand that. I truly do. But I don't think Watford would have been relegated, even though they have been in relegation form for 3 months. No question about that. I don't think they would have been relegated, though. I don't think so. They might have been in a scrap. They might not have been in a scrap. But the Val Ismael story, for me, will end with, I think, a little bit of, you know, disappointment. Not just in the manager and his poor substitutions and some of his strange decisions, but also that the club reacted the way they did. I get it. The run was unacceptable. Not winning since November in the Premier League, in the Championship, was unacceptable. And so that was one of the big things. And I mentioned the things, other things earlier that were a problem. And then when you call pre-Swansea press conference to say that the fans have got to be given something to get behind by the players, and the players then go on the pitch hours later and give the fans precisely nothing to shout about in the first half at the Vic against Swansea, you know that the team's given up on you. I think that was really obvious to me for the first time in all of this, that the players had absolutely given up on the manager. You can't go at the Vic from winning the first game against QPR and playing such great football, and then playing an excellent first half and second half against Plymouth, but getting a draw, to playing the games that Watford have played at the Vic over the last 3.5 months plus. You can't. That's not about a lack of confidence for me. Some of it might be, but I think a lot more of it is about a lack of quality. And I get it that quality and confidence can be intertwined. But a lot more of this, in my eyes, especially now, over these last couple of months, has been much more about a lack of quality, a lack of commitment, and a lack of fealty to the manager's vision, whatever that vision might have been for Val Ishmael. So, as far as that goes, I have a very mixed reaction. For the long term, I don't think it's a good move. I think you have to build, as I said, and building takes time. Owners and fans, however, are not patient. And the reality is that there are things that Val did that I don't think the owner, in the end, good relationship or no, liked. The Ryan Andrews situation was a big problem. That was a big problem at the club, as far as I know, as far as I believe. I don't know for a fact, but it had to be. It's not just about the run of results. I mean, some people are going to say it's the results, but it's not only the results. Subbing off Kayembe and Kone in that Huddersfield match after 27 minutes, bold and warranted, but obviously the players were rankled by that too. Kone stormed off, went through the media suite according to Andrew French, which you don't normally see the players do. And, the bottom line is Kayembe didn't necessarily appreciate it either. And Kayembe, by the way, is well liked, and so is Kone, as far as I know. And Ryan Andrews well liked as well, as far as I know. And obviously, the players are not going to take too kindly to what's been going on. And the other thing is, don't forget, Ryan Andrews had a 4-match ban, including 1 match for dissent in the Sunderland game months ago. Now, this could have happened all the way since Sunderland, because even during that long, great run, Watford were poor in a load of those games at the Vic. So I'll remember the positives about Val Ishmael are the long run they went on where they lost just 3 times in 21 games or whatever it was. And also the fact that he wasn't afraid to discipline players and make a statement with some subs. Now, that all unraveled for me at least in these last 2 months, where he just absolutely, I think he completely lost the plot on some of these subs. I really do think that. And for the aforementioned reasons I've described and discussed around Dennis and around Ryan Andrews and around Ben Hamer for that matter. Ben Hamer, given 1 game off, I can understand, but then giving him 2 games off and having Daniel Backman, after making the mistakes against Swansea, come back in to make more mistakes against Coventry, that was strange to me as well. So there's things lately, for me, that this manager's done that were really beyond the pale and unacceptable. Unacceptable. And he's gone. Let me know what you think, by the way, whether he was right to have been sacked, or should they have sacked him at the end of the season, or should they have let him at least begin next season? Let me know what your reaction, by the way, to the sacking of Val Ishmael is in the responses in the comments to this video. Now, as for Tom Cleverley, I think it's an exciting opportunity for him. I am pleased for him. I'm very happy for Tom Cleverley. I think he's going to be a really good presence in that clubhouse. I don't know what the dynamics were in the clubhouse when he was a player alongside these very same players, many of them from just last season, in the few games he got to play last season. But all I know is that these players will play for him. I'm confident of that, especially with just 9 games to play. It's not known who's going to take over when the new season begins, whether it's Cleverley. I doubt that it's going to be Cleverley, by the way. But this is a stopgap measure. This is what normally happens at the club when the manager's sacked this close to the end of the season. Whether it was Hayden Mullins a few years back after Nigel Pearson was sacked those last 2 games or so, and he got to manage the last 2, or whether it is this situation, Tom Cleverley with the last 9 games of the season. Last season it was Chris Wilder with the last 11 games of the season. Do you see the pattern here? And I think Tom Cleverley, I think will be positive. I think he will take the shackles off. And I think these players will respond to him. The only thing for me is if Tom Cleverley is allowed to stay on beyond this season at the club. And by the way, would you like to see Tom Cleverley stay beyond the season? Let me know in the comments as well. The only thing I think that I would raise a question on Tom Cleverley is when things start to go south, This group of players, will they continue to respect him, or will they continue to do what they've been doing with managers? Chew them up and spit them out for breakfast. But it is an exciting opportunity for Tom Cleverley, and I hope he succeeds. I will be supporting him full throttle, obviously. He's a man who's been here at Watford in two different spells at least, has been a model citizen and a servant of the club, a devoted servant, an ambassador to the club. Of course, at the moment, prior to this announcement, he was the head coach of the under 18s. He got them to the PDL Cup final as recently as, what, a couple of weeks ago now. And obviously, he's not going to be taking the helm at that final. He will, of course, be in the dugout for the Watford men with the Watford men's first team, beginning in the game against Birmingham City coming up, of course, next week. Now, look, I am looking forward to seeing what he does, and I'll be looking forward to seeing how the players respond to him. I think that's going to be very important. I'll be looking forward to see the start of the football, and I'm looking forward to all of those things. But with Tom Cleverley, and I wish him all the very best, and I'll be pulling for him to do well. And I think the players are going to respond to him, as I said. But I just want to know, with all of those things said, what, again, is the long-term plan for this club where the Watford men's first team is concerned? Because Tom Cleverley, Valerien Ismael, or someone else, notwithstanding, the real dirty work has to be done by this club this coming summer. Recruitment has to be far better. Gianluca Nani, who was here previously, is here back here again. And he and his team and the owner and the front office are going to have to get their heads together and really get serious. Because it's no good sacking a manager and then you don't do anything on the recruiting end to support the new manager. It's no good sacking a manager and you've not done this, that, or the other to bring in players that are going to improve the club and improve the men's first team specifically. That is their remit now for the front office in the summer. And they've got to put their shoes on and start running. And I really hope that they do that because it's been an underwhelming season. It's been the same season the last 3 years at the Vic, especially. And the bottom line is that we have been stuck in quicksand and stuck in the mud for the last 3 seasons at the Vic. And sacking all these managers is not advancing us. It's just not. It might be keeping us from perhaps being in a relegation scrap or actually getting relegated, but is not allowing us to grow. It's not allowing us to really truly rip up the foundations and begin and platform and build. Rome wasn't built in a day. Watford FC wasn't built in a day. But this present owner seems to think that the building will actually be better once you keep sacking managers, no matter how poor some of those managers are. And many Watford fans agreed, or at least felt that Val was poor as a manager here. But I want to know about the long term. That's the short term. I want to know about the long term. Because if Watford had to get relegated, this might have been the season that it might have been a good idea for that to happen. So that there's some real rebuilding, actual rebuilding being done. Growing pains, backward steps are all a part of building something. When you are first trained to ride a bicycle, you don't ride it straight away. You fall off many times. Your balance wobbles. You get tested. You fall over. You don't hold your balance. And that happens for a period of time, over and over and over again, before you finally stabilize without the stabilizers and you begin to gain confidence and you start to ride that two-wheel bicycle. That's what a bicycle is, 2 wheels. And you finally get the knack of it. You get the knack, you get going. That's what you do. But you can't ride that bike without falling off it more than a few times. If you continue to say, well, no, you can't ride the bike anymore. You've got to allow people to build something. You didn't allow Rob Edwards to build something, and you didn't allow Val Ismael to build something. And I get it. Perhaps those cases are not the best comparisons. One went toward the beginning of the season, the other went toward the end of it. With a real relegation possibility, a scrap emerging, developing, or I would say relegation form over the last 2.5, 3 months. Last 2, 3 months. Different scenarios, but the same result. And again, if you are telling us that you want to build something, then let someone build it. Stop changing the builders. And then you're surprised that the foundation is crumbling. Then you're surprised that there's no structure. When you keep changing the builder, they're going to put different ingredients in, but when you keep changing them, your foundation is not solid. It's shaky. So I don't think this club, this owner specifically, has learned anything. I don't care what's going on publicly, what the forums are, what the fan forums are, the fora. The bottom line is that the same things are happening. And while there are some in Watford land who think that this was the right move and say that he had to go, and I understand that because of the long sequence of poor results. I mean, yeah, in the short term, yeah, it was obviously a move that was necessitated. But in the long term, I don't think it was a great move to do this in the long term. Because what are we prepared to do? Are we interested in building, or are we just interested in hiring and sacking managers? I mean, I want to know. I really would like to know. If someone came down here right now from planet Mars and said to you as a Watford supporter, what is the objective of Watford Football Club as it regards the Watford men's first team? What would you tell them? You wouldn't give them an answer because you wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to give my answer either. As I said, I would not know what to say to them. That means that the objective in the long term is not fully defined and it's not really there. You've been told things, you've been told this, you've been told that, but it's the actions that tell you the most and speak the loudest. I wish Tom Cleverley all the very best. And the things that I'll remember Val for on the positive level, as I may have said earlier, is this long run that they went on after that Sunderland debacle. And seriously, there were some things about the games that Watford played, at least in some of them, that I thought had some promise to them. There just was no consistency, though. And that long run without a win at home in the championship, you can't abide by that. And few managers would have survived that anyway. But I do hope that Watford FC have some success in the men's first team with Tom Cleverley. I wish him all the very best. And I certainly hope that he can carve out some wins for us in the remaining 9 games of what was yet another poor season at the Vic, especially. This has been the YouOrns observation.